Namaste. So, this is the fourth and concluding part of Collected Works of Sri Aurobindo, Volume 20, which is the Renaissance in India. And today we'll take up that penultimate question which Sri Aurobindo takes up in this wonderful book as to what really is Hinduism, what really is Sanatana Dharma. And very often we'll hear these questions because normally when we talk about religion, we hear about certain dogmas, certain do's and don'ts, certain papal head, somebody who is the head of the whole movement. We hear about one particular sacred book, one particular figure, but none of these things, some obligatory rituals, none of these things are there in Hinduism. And yet we cannot just say that Hinduism means you do anything, whatever way you want to lead your life. That's not it. So what really is Hinduism? And Sri Aurobindo raises this question very beautifully and powerfully. He says, just here is the first baffling difficulty over which the European mind stumbles. For it finds itself unable to make out what Hindu religion is. Where, it asks, is the soul? Where is its mind and fixed thought? Where is the form of its body? How can there be a religion which has no rigid dogmas? I mean, there are plenty of things, but some do it, some don't do it. It's not obligatory. In different parts of India, you will see that there are different ways people, celebrate. Like if you go to certain areas in Konkan, you will see now with Diwali, Narkasur Vad is celebrated more than Ravana Vad. So you will see that if you go to these western parts in the Western Ghats, there will be Narkasur pictures and effigies, and they'll be burnt, which I'm sure many of us have never seen. In the northern parts, you will see Ravan Bad. If you go still further down south, you may not see either. And they are all, Hindus, very staunch, very Vedic-oriented Hindus. So it asks that what really is this, where there is nothing like a fixed dogma, rigid dogma, demanding belief on pain of eternal damnation. No theological postulates. So it wants, theological postulates are like, love this person, do this, don't do this, based on certain understanding of the laws that if you commit a sin, you will forever rot in hell. Now, this is a theological postulate. So these things are not there. If you pray to God, you will be granted a seat in heaven. None of this is there. Even no fixed theology, no credo distinguishing it from antagonistic or rival religions. No fixed theology. If you read the Shiv Puran and the Vishnu Puran, you will see a different understanding even of the way creation has come into being. If you read the Devi Bhagavad, you will see another dimension altogether. So, how can there be a religion which has no papal head? Papal head is like, you have the Pope in Christianity, or in Islam, you have the head of that's how the Khilafat movement had started, the chief of the whole Islamic kingdom. So there is nothing like Khalifa. So you don't have anything like that. So Pandits are there, but Mandaleshwars are there, but they are not head. They don't decide what is to be done and what is not to be done, and people don't follow. So they can have their own little influence over their own little people. Even the four Shankaracharyas don't decide that what is to be followed by all. So there is no papal head. How can there be a religion in which has no papal head, no governing ecclesiastic body, no church? There is nothing like somebody will condemn you or throw you out. There is no church like that. Chapel or congregational system. In fact, if you see, temples have come much later. If you go to the Vedic period, there are no temples. You don't document. Even the gods are very different. So temples have come later, primarily with the coming of tantras. So, how can there be a body like that? No binding religious form of any kind obligatory on all its adherents. Even the Sandhya Vandan and the 5 times was primarily meant for the Brahmins, who were to wear a sacred thread and pursue all this. It was not binding on all the Hindus. For the Hindu priests are mere ceremonial officiants without any ecclesiastical authority or disciplinary powers, and the Pandits are mere interpretations of the Shastra, not the lawgivers of the religion or its rulers. How again can Hinduism be called a religion when it admits all beliefs, allowing even the kind of high reaching atheism and agnosticism? So he's talking of a high reaching atheism, not like atheism which without examining just casually says there is no God. But when you examine, when you look at, for instance, typical example is Buddhism. Buddhism is a high reaching atheism. If you look at it really, it doesn't believe really in God. But it says there is suffering and there must be a way out of suffering. It gives you a path, the Dharma, through which you can come out of suffering. There is an eightfold path, there is a process, there is a way. But it doesn't believe in, that there is a God. That way it is regarded as a atheistic religion. Anatmavad. That's why it's called as Avedic. So, there are religions like that. So he's using the word high reaching atheism and agnosticism, and permits all possible spiritual experiences, all kinds of religious adventures. So how can you call such a wide variety of things which are combined under a single roof as a religion? But this is actually the strength of what we know today as Hinduism. The reason why it has survived all the various, because there were so many branches and lines through which it could find a route in which it could integrate whatever came within its fold and create something new. So that is the great strength of Hinduism. But then he raises this question that, but after all, what is Hinduism? What does it teach? What does it practice? What are its common factors? So now here Sri Aurobindo gives us three main things which are important for all of us to remember what really is the Hindu teaching. So first is, of course, Ekamev Dityam. There is one existence without a second. So all existences carry something of that one existence. The source. This is the first teaching of Hinduism. Second teaching is that you can arrive at it through multiple paths. Because it is in everything and everywhere. You can arrive him through a deity. So there are countless gods. Each god represents a certain kind of power, certain aspect of the one deity. So you can arrive through that. Or you can arrive through a human representative, a guru. You can arrive at him by reading a book. You can arrive at him through absolutely novel paths. Hinduism allows that. So it's not that there have to be fixed path. You can even create a new path which branches out of the main tributary and leads to that. And we know experiments like that have taken place in Hindu thought. That's how new cult sects came into existence. But Hinduism is not a cult or a sect, but it allows the emergence of many cults and sects precisely because of this focus on the one existence without a second. Find him by whatever way, it doesn't matter. So you may believe that, doing a certain breathing technique will lead you to self-find. You may believe sitting in meditation, or you may believe that, remembering the divine at all times. You may believe that simply contemplating and by trying to use your intelligence turned upward, inward towards some great truth in pursuit of that, you, by whatever means, prayer, worship, meditation, living a life which is beautiful and noble, it doesn't even care to define God. So you can simply say God is truth, God is love, God is beauty. All these various ways you can approach. And Sri Aurobindo says that this very beautifully, to discover and closely approach and enter into whatever kind or degree of unity with the permanent. Permanent is the way Buddha called him. This infinite, the way we see it in the Upanishads, this eternal is the highest height and last efforts of its spiritual experience. This is the first universal credo. Follow this great spiritual aim by one of the 1,000 paths recognized in India, or even any new path which branches off from them, and you are at the core of the religion. For its second basic idea is the manifold way of man's approach to the eternal and infinite. So that's why you see it's something very interesting you will find in Hindu religion. When we have grown up also, if you go to a mosque, you don't believe tumhara dharam brasht ho gaya. You don't believe that, now, you have spoiled your religion. If you go to a church, You don't feel that, you have deviated from your religion. But it's very difficult for certain religions to do that. Because there are fixed dogmas. You can't do that. But we can hear, for instance, Sufi kalams, and where it's all about, they speak about Allah, and but we feel that bhava inside this Sufi kalam where somebody is praying to the divine in his own way, and we enjoy it. Because it can, whatever way, that psychic emotion, we know how to feel it. And where we feel it, we are fine with it. But it's very difficult in certain approaches to God, which are very limited and rigid. And this is one of the challenges that Hinduism has always faced, because while it accepts and integrates all that comes into it. So it takes, for instance, when Christianity came, it took, okay, this is one of the paths. So it is wonderful. Even when Islam came, okay, this is one of the paths. It teaches, universal brotherhood. ठीक है, Vasudev Kutumbha. So we always have. But when our religion becomes exclusive, then becomes a problem, because integrating anything is not just one-way process. Unless you finish it, which is not the way of Hinduism. So when the other person tries to finish it, then the problem comes. So Hinduism accepts all these: an infinite conscious force, executive energy, will or law, maya, prakriti, shakti, or karma is behind all happenings, whether to us they seem good or bad, acceptable or unacceptable, fortunate or adverse. The infinite creates and is Brahma, it preserves, and is Vishnu, it destroys or takes to itself, and is Rudra or Shiva. The supreme energy, beneficent in upholding and protection, is or else formulates itself as the mother of the worlds, Lakshmi or Durga or Chandi or Kali. The one Godhead manifests himself in the form of his qualities in various names and Godheads. So this is the second beautiful aspect of Hinduism. And the third is, Hinduism believed in what today in modern physics we may will end up discovering, that this material frame is not the only world. So it believed in a many-tiered universe. This knowledge is there in other traditions also. It's there in ancient Islam. If you read it, they talk about the seven, Asman. In Christianity it is there, in theology. You have the gods and the titans. But it never got developed. And it was drowned under the very dogmatic, rigid form which appeared later on. And that was because it didn't allow an evolutionary impulsion. Whereas in Hinduism, there is this evolutionary impulsion. So always there is scope of fresh revelations. New masters will come. They will find a new way. And we accept it. It's okay. I mean, not that everybody has to go to every master, but somebody who has a following, it's perfectly fine. So this impulsion of that eternal and infinite can be explored in many ways. New ways. This is something ill-built within Hinduism. And there are many planes of existence, and therefore we understand the impact of many of these forces which act upon our life, and how we can come in contact with them is native to Hindu thought. And the third idea of strongest consequence is the base of Indian religion, is the most dynamic for the inner spiritual life. It is this, that while the supreme or the divine can be approached through a universal consciousness, and by piercing through all inner and outer nature, that or he can be met by each individual soul in itself, in its own spiritual part, because there is something in it that is intimately one, or at least intimately related with the one divine existence. The essence of Indian religion is to aim at so growing and so living that we can grow out of the ignorance which veils this self-knowledge from our mind and life, and become aware of the divinity within us. So this is the third most important thing. We know that how Swami Vivekananda started with this very third thing in Chicago address, that I am proud to belong to a religion and come from a land where we believe that God dwells within man. This is a very fantastic teaching, though we have grown up in it, so we may not understand what it really means. But it means that He is in man. And anyone, anywhere in the world can contact Him. Even if he has no idea about any religion. All that is needed is this sudden urge, this aspiration, this seeking. This thirst can take any form. Is there a truth behind appearances? And if he goes like that, he will discover it. We have spoken about this experience of Nishtha Wilson, Woodrow Wilson's daughter. She was just 15, sitting in, or she was lying down in that garden in one of the places in US, and suddenly she felt that nature is so beautiful. I wish God could enjoy all this the way I am enjoying it, because the idea was of God who is up above in heaven. And suddenly she felt all the joy rushing from every side and entering into her. And it was her first contact that no, he indeed is present in nature, in everything and everywhere. So from this has come the diverse practices of Indian thought, that everything has become sacred. Why? Because God is immanent in everything. So you can pick up a stone and worship, and you can realize God. You can pray to a river, you can pray to the sun, you can pray to the stars, you can pray to the moon, you can pray to trees, you can pray to different rivers. Everything can become an object of worship. From birth to death, everything is sacred in Hindu thought. Precisely because of this idea that God is in everything. Whereas there are, as you know, in comparison, certain religions which deny the existence of God in everything. So this everything has been carried to what extent? Indian religion believes that music, art, painting, poetry, sculpture, architecture, science, technology, everything can become a means to discover God and to manifest Him. So if you go to any of these sciences, art, sculpture, architecture, you will see that it is a kind of worship to the eternal or an expression of the eternal. This is dance. So all this because we believe that the divine is the source of everything. He is the inspiration behind everything. And all this nature and creation is nothing else but His Leela, His expression, His manifestation. And we can participate in that. So that's why we see that normally you have Shastra. Shastra is a word used for scripture. But in India, all the different sciences, I mean, including arts, including archery, they were all called as Shastra. So you'll have, and Vidya. So they are all Shastras, they are all Vidya, and you will see that even in something like shooting an arrow, Shastra will come in, Vidya will come in, higher worlds will come in, invocations, mantra is coming. Where do you can't imagine that, you are going to kill and you are invoking the divine presence and you are actually activating technology, which is, super modern technology, but with the help of mantra. And even when you don't know, you can still make it something very, this interweaving of the different worlds with the material. There are two very interesting stories. One is when Karna shoots an arrow at Arjun. So he has made a promise with Takshak. Takshak wants to kill Arjuna when the time comes. So Takshak comes and he calls him and he comes and sits on Karna's arrow. Now this is not a technically known weapon because nobody does this normally. So when he shoots the arrow, what happens? Normally you shoot an arrow and a good warrior knows its profile. So he shoots. His mind has calculated this arrow is coming from there and you will shoot. Now because this Takshak snake, the spirit of the snake is sitting with all its poison, it doesn't move in a normal way. It just goes, swings like a snake. And before Arjun can read what it is, it's a fatal bite or fatal hit. All the poison is there. Shri Krishna realizes and he puts the whole chariot down. So you see, other world has come in. There is another very interesting story where Arjun is fighting one of the kingdoms during the Rajsu Yag, even expansion of kingdoms. You see, when empires were built, it was not like, the blind conquest where you go, you destroy. It was a yagya. So yagya means that whatever you find, you have to share it. Yagya, you have to sanctify it. You have to ennoble it. So annexing a kingdom was not that loot and plunder. You have to turn it into a yagya. Means now you take care of the subjects and in a better way. You have to refine, ennoble and uplift. So there was Ashwamedh Yagya, there was Rajasu Yagya. So Arjuna goes and he has to fight one of the kingdoms where the prince says that I am not going to give up. And his mother says, yes, good, because though it is imminent death, fighting Arjuna, but okay, you fight. His name is Pravir. So he sits and he fights. And somehow Arjuna is not able to handle this. He tries everything, but he cannot, kill this man. Why? Because his mother is praying to the divine, and Pravir himself is a Krishna Bhakt. Now you see how there is a weaving of different dimensions. You won't find these stories anywhere. Maybe some ancient Greek myths you will see something of this kind, but very remotely. You have the sword given to Perseus by Athene, or in Homer's Odyssey, you will find Iliad, some of these stories. But they are all gone. In modern, the religions which came subsequently, the connection is lost. So, Arjuna says, what is happening? So he says, you can't kill him. Why? Because he is a Krishna Bhakt. I am sitting on your chariot, but he loves me. And his mother is praying, so what do? Now one of the two has to go. Arjuna also can't be killed. His very skills are of that kind, and Krishna is there. Then Shri Krishna says, okay, now you shoot an arrow. And as he shoots the arrow, Shri Krishna sits on the arrowhead. And Pravir recognizes it. He says, that's why I had come. Because if I die like this, I gain liberation. Now if you read this story, you don't realize whether it's actually a fight taking place, whether it's a game that is happening, or it's a play of the Leela, or it's a tapasya, sadhana. Everything is interwoven in it. It's something as gory and dangerous as a, fight to kill. So compare it with all these things that you read in the past, like gladiators and all this kind of. Then you realize that how this culture had interwoven spirituality into every aspect of life. So he says, all beings are to the Indian mind portions of the divine, evolving souls, and sure of an eventual salvation and release into the spirit. So this is another very interesting aspect, that not only some people who have a fixed belief in a certain religion will get released. All. Why? Because they are part of an evolutionary journey. But Indian thought distinguished between three types of evolutionary souls, because they evolve through three stages. In actual practical life, you have to make a distinction. So in Tantra, there is a very interesting distinction. It is between Pashu, Veer and Dev. So there are three bhavas through which you can approach the divine. So one is Pashuvat. So that's how you see that when you have that kind of crude mind, which brute kind of mindset, almost to the extent of being, completely in a state of tamas, then whom do you pray? You pray to Pashupati. That's the whole secret. You pray to Shiva as Pashupati. So he is the lord of the animal herd. And then when you develop, you have the Veer Bhav, that is the heroic soul in man. Then you can take to any of these, great gods, where you see this, you can pray to Shiva, you can pray to Vishnu, and you have that Veer Bhav, where like a human being, you have the worship where you have to master yourself and conquer yourself. So the same Shiva who comes as Pashupati, he changes his form. He is a yogi, tapasvi. You have to engage in self-mastery. And then there is the Deva Bhav. Deva Bhav means now out of tamas and rajas, you have climbed into sattva. So you are already a fairly refined person. Now you are ready actually for the spiritual life. So he comes as Gopala. So he plays with you, you develop that bhakti, and the same who came to us as Pashupati, now he comes as Gopal, the leader of the cows, the cowherds boy, who plays with us. He plays the flute, and you just follow him blindly, and you arrive. So this was the gradation, basically. Tamasic person, Rajasic person, and Sattvic person. And the Gita makes a still further distinction between a Rajo-Tamasic person, Rajasic person, but gravitating towards Tamas, which is Asuric kind of humanity, and a Rajo-Sattvic person, who is climbing upwards. So this was the way they understood humanity and different gradations. And for different gradations, there were different kinds of approaches which were permitted as part of the whole journey. In Tantra, you see that it went to even further. It was a bold attempt, premature attempt. But you see, if you go to a temple in Ujjain, they actually offer alcohol to the god. And Bhairav, he is down, and you will see cobras dancing on the steps. So I've been there, and they will offer drinks to Bhairav, and then you're supposed to take it as prasad. I said, please excuse me, I'm done with all this. This prasad I don't want. So, but nearby you will have a kind of tantric pit where there are tantrics who even eat the dead flesh. What do you do with that? Now you see, any approach and every approach which led you toward that. Now why do they do it? People don't understand. You know, what is the reason, logic behind it? Logic is very interesting. Logic is simply that, behind every contact of the world there is the divine hidden. But we can't discover because we have raga dvesh, likes, dislikes, and jugupsa. Jugupsa means shrinking from certain aspects of life. Now when you let go of that shrinking, and you have the seeking, it's not let go of the shrinking like an animal, and you have the seeking, then behind everything which is an appearance you will discover. So in Tantra Sadhana of the left hand kind, you are supposed to master all shrinkings. And one of them is that extreme is, dead person's flesh. I mean, is not like a chop and make a meal out of it, but something. Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa just took a little vista. He said, I can't do that. So, or some people taste something of the human element. Usually it is blood or sweat, or because these are things which are. So to that extent it has gone, which is just unimaginable. And this was, there are very interesting stories about it. That people have, practiced these kind of rituals. But this is not mainstream. But yet it has been allowed. Just because it is part of human activity, shrinking. And you see in the Isha Upanishad, there is a very interesting description of the realized person. It is, who is the person who sees the oneself everywhere? What is his sign? So one of them is that he doesn't have moha and shoka. He doesn't have moha, delusion about who he is. He knows who he is. He doesn't have grief. And the third is tato na vijugupsate. He shrinks from nothing. Wherever he is able to remain in that state of freedom. His freedom is unconditional and independent of every state. So it has explored all the various dimensions, of course, in ways which may appear crude, but there are crude people. So this, what I was mentioning just now, one crude, ill-formed, still outward, still vitally and physically minded, can be led only by devices suited to its ignorance. It's like an asur. And for that, there is a path appropriate to that. Another more developed and capable of a much stronger and deeper psycho-spiritual experience offers a riper make of manhood gifted with a more conscious intelligence, a larger vital or aesthetic opening, a stronger ethical power of the nature. This is the hero warrior. A third, the ripest and most developed of all, is ready for the spiritual heights, fit to receive or to climb towards the loftiest ultimate truth of God and of its own being, and to tread the summits of divine experience. So this is the really a ripe soul, and by an inner aspiration. That's why there is a Bahya Puja. When one is not very developed, you need something external as a representation. Then there is a Manasik Puja, where you have the image of the divine or the God whom you adore in your mind. And then there is a Adhyatmik Puja, where your life becomes a worship. Now when you say, my life is a worship, my life is a prayer to the divine, it's a completely an inner process. So, and there your conception of divine also becomes very vast. He is the one who is present in all things, all beings. That's why the mother says in integral yoga, you have to start with an integral conception of the divine. There in volume 8, very first question, it's something very beautiful, powerful, very eye-opening. And then he speaks about the tantric distinction between the animal man, the hero man, and the divine man, Pashu, Veer, Dev. So, this is how Hinduism grew, developed itself. But then these things are sometimes too subtle, too profound. If you read the Vedic lore, the Vedic literature, Vedas, 4 Vedas, the Upanishads, 12 main Upanishads culled out from there, the Brahmanas, the Aranyaks, they are not easy to, one is read and connect with. Your intellectual mind can try to stretch out, But it's not easy for everyone. So they knew the need of every level of humanity. For the masses, there should be something for the masses. They cannot be deprived. So for the masses, we had Itihas, the same truth, but given in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Same truth. Human soul's journey, epic climb, where forces of good and evil, forces of progress and retrogression, gods and the titans clash. They are clashing inwardly. The Vedas speak about it. They describe all the four Valas and Panis and Vritras. They steal the cow and put it in the subconscious caves. You can't understand. But here, when you see actually that there is a demonic powers and energies, and they are energies of self-aggrandizement, ambition, lust, greed. So they are symbolized in a particular character. And then there are energies which are turned towards Godward. And these are human characters. In Mahabharata, they are all human characters. The beauty of the difference between Mahabharata and Ramayana is, Ramayana you can almost see it, that this is humanly superhuman, this is demonically superhuman. It's very obvious. Its scheme is very simple. There is Rama, there is Ravana. There is Ayodhya kingdom where generally people are very nice, and there is that kingdom in Lanka where except for Vibhishan, all are non-vegetarians. Kumbhkarna, if you see the description, 52 yards. So you can understand that these are not normal human characters, but of a superhuman demonic type. But if you read the Mahabharata, where do you place people like Karna? Where do you place people like Bhishma, Drona, even for that matter Duryodhan? Because he's an ambitious guy. But at the same time, this ambitious man, prince, actually is also Veer. He wants to fight. He doesn't want. His Mama Shakuni tries to, entangle him into all kinds of things. But he wants to fight. He doesn't shrink from battle. So there is even in him something which is good. So when you read the Mahabharata, it is far more complex because the characters are human. And semi-human divine elements are brought in, but as subordinate. In Ramayana, it is too obvious. So in that sense, Ramayana has a much more larger appeal. But when the mind becomes more intellectual, more subtle, then Mahabharata has appeal. See, this is the difference. When you have a very simple heart, you connect with Ram samana Prabhu nahi kahu. And Ravan, very obviously you know that 10-headed Ravan. Ravan must, you may convince that he was, he had read the Vedas, but you know that this fellow is, he is, cheated Mata Sita. And so it has a much larger, vaster appeal. That's why you will see for Ramayana, there are many kathakas and rhapsodies, there are many plays, natyas, various places Ramayana is enacted. Not only in India, in Thailand, in Java, in Bali, own version of Ramayana. You won't find that so much in Mahabharata because Mahabharata structure is much more intellectual. It sets you to think, is Karna really good or a bad guy? The lines are very thin, subtle, and you have to really get deeper to understand that what was wrong. So it leaves you with certain questions which make you think of in a certain sense. So Sri Aurobindo described these two epics very beautifully. The Mahabharata and Ramayana, and Sri Aurobindo says very clearly, it is known about Mahabharata, and Sri Aurobindo says rightly so. One, it is known as the fifth Veda, and second, it has been told that what is not there in this Bharata is not there in the world. And Sri Aurobindo says, yes, it is true, because the entire cosmos, there is cosmology, theology, there is the play of forces, there are human characters, there is the human journey, the epic of the soul, there is the divine avatar. All the elements are there in Mahabharata. And both are woven around a real event. But then the real event is there, but many things have been added up to weave a beautiful story. So he says the Mahabharata and Ramayana are itihasas of this kind on a large scale and with a massive purpose. The poets who wrote and those who added to these great bodies of poetic writing did not intend merely to tell an ancient tale in a beautiful or noble manner, or even to fashion a poem pregnant with much richness of interest and meaning. Though they did both these things with a high success, they wrote with a sense of their function as architects and sculptors of life. So that's how we all know, many of us who have grown in the tradition of Ramayana and Mahabharata. We just imbibed the character of Arjun. After that, you could tell this hero is your idol. It cannot be. A person who has read the Ramayana and Mahabharata will laugh if you tell, oh, this hero is like, you cannot idolize a film hero. You cannot idolize a cricketer. Because your idol is fixed now. It is Arjuna or Rama or some such. You grew up in that. I mean, I have grown up, and I'm sure many of us have grown up like that. So how they were actually sculptors of life. Unknowingly, when Valmiki and Vyas must have been there, but they were sculpturing our own souls. So this is something amazing, and for all times to come. They did both with high success. They were sculptors of life, creative exponents, fashioners of significant forms of the national thought and religion and ethics and culture. So our national thought was woven around Rama and Krishna. You see, these were the two main ideals. So whenever, you had to deal with issues of international issues or within the nation, how to deal with the law and complex situations. So you fall back upon, this was told in Mahabharata. This is how Krishna handled the situation. This is how Rama managed it. So you go back to Ramayana and Mahabharata and you draw the inspiration. And of course there is an insight, because it's not written like a do's and don'ts. But it gives you enough insight to act upon that. So they molded the national character. A profound stress of thought on life, a large and vital view of religion and society, a certain strain of philosophic idea runs through these poems. And I must say that, this is something unique. Nowhere in the world, nowhere, in no religion, you will find this kind of through the narrative of two stories, that an entire spiritual life living has been given to us in this way. It is something really amazing. And I can only understand that, of course, Sri Aurobindo gave now Savitri, but Savitri of a very different genre and very different level. So, and of course, Sri Aurobindo includes that, whether in original Sanskrit or rewritten in the regional tongues, brought to the masses by Kathakas, rhapsodists, reciters and exegetes, became and remained one of the chief instruments of popular education and culture, molded the thought, character, aesthetic and religious mind of the people, and gave even to the illiterate some sufficient tincture of philosophy, ethics, social and political ideas, aesthetic, emotion, poetry, fiction and romance. Even to the most illiterate, it gave that idea. What really, philosophy is, what ethics is, what romance is, what human relations are. That's why I often say that, socialism we have in India, we don't have to follow another model. Look at life of Rama, you will understand socialism in the deepest sense. You want to understand democracy, you look at the life of Sri Krishna and you will understand, what democracy is. So, the Mahabharata especially is not only the story of the Bharatas, the epic of an early event. It is said popularly of it and with a certain measure of truth that whatever is in India is in the Mahabharata. So, I used to tell my students in psychology when they wanted to know a book, to read one book. I said, if you want to read one book to understand all about human psychology, read the Mahabharata. And I am saying this in real earnest, and I'll quote what Sri Aurobindo has one place said: if you have not read the Mahabharata, actually you have not understood India and what Indianness is. So, of course I read it as a child, and then several stories you read and reread. It's something amazing. And now look at his description. The whole poem, Mahabharata, has been built like a vast national temple. Sheer beauty of expression, unrolling slowly its immense and complex idea from chamber to chamber. So you have the story of King Bharat. It starts with a fantastic idea. What is that idea? It literally shatters your preconceived notions about life. Here is a woman who never married, and just on a promise, the prince must reclaim the throne. It starts with a woman and her fire and her strength, who must go back to the king and remind him that, look here, he is your son. Just imagine, it starts in a very grand way. Then you have the story of Shantanu, you have Ganga and Bhishma coming in, the father who goes through despondency, each of which can become a unique chapter. So chamber to chamber. So there are stories within stories. Then you have the story of these three, along with Bhishma, Vichitravirya and the other Chitrangad. And then you have the story of these three, Pandu, Dhritarashtra and Vidur coming in. And then it doesn't end there. In Mahabharata particularly, you have so many sub-stories which are woven. Savitri's story is there. When they are going into the forest, then you have so many stories which emerge there. So it is like, as he said, national temple where you are going from one chamber to another. So, but he continues, crowded with significant groups and sculptures and inscriptions. When you look at just the life of even King Shantanu, who later on dies almost a weak man, depressed. And yet when you look at his life, you wonder, my God, who was this great legendary king? You read about Bharat, you don't know that much later Arjuna is going to come. You just marvel at this, One of the early images I remember, which inspired me about King Bharat, that he was known to have fought with a lion, barehanded, and tame him. Now this, it's a different kind of a story of a different thing altogether. The grouped figures carved in divine or semi-divine proportions, a humanly aggrandized and half uplifted to superhumanity. A humanity aggrandized and half uplifted to superhumanity. Who could be that person who will promise for his father's sorrow? He says, I'll never marry. Why? Because otherwise he wants to marry someone whose demand is that their progeny must become the child and go to the throne. But if Bhishma is there, he can't. So he says that I'll never marry and I will never be the king. Now when you look at it, he is human, but he is semi-human. What a proportion aggrandized. Look at Karna. Even I'm talking of the faulty ones. If you come to Yudhishthir, he goes to what extent of speaking truth? This is not human. It is, even there is a war situation where they will be lost, defeated. Krishna is suggesting him, but no, his heart is shrinking from that. His mind is shrinking from that. Look at Arjuna. So capable. He can use all these celestial weapons he has acquired by his tapasya, but he won't use them. So, what kind of characters are these? And they are all of human and lifted to superhumanity, and yet always true to the human motive and idea and feeling. The strain of the real constantly raised by the tones of the ideal. This is what you see in Mahabharata. So Mahabharata appeals more to the intellectual mind, which has grown very complex, and it plays with complex ideas, subtle things, where Ramayana is very direct and simple. You have basically on one side Rama with the filial love and everything, on the other side Ravana. So there are no shades in between, and it's very easy to handle and navigate, and very beautiful, very aesthetic, very sensitively written. The life of this world amply portrayed but subjected to the conscious influence and presence of the powers of the worlds behind it, and the whole unified by the long embodied procession of a constant idea working out in the wide steps of the poetic story. So this is a whole like a temple, but there is a common thread which is running through the story, and that's a grand narrative. So this about what is the motive when you run through this entire story, Mahabharata and Ramayana. You have one word which constantly comes, which is the central thought of Indian entire understanding. It is Dharma. If you understand Dharma, you understand India. And Dharma is not at all religion. And that's why when people say Hinduism is a way of life any which way, it is not any which way. You are given, it's a very liberal way of life. But there is only one thing which you are expected to consider, and that is dharma. But what is dharma? It is something very subtle, it is within you. So you have to discover it. So there are different kinds of dharmas for different kinds of humanity, for different conditions, for different states, for different situations. There is not one do's and set of do's and don'ts for everyone. So dharma is the common theme you see through Ramayana and you see through Mahabharata. All the different shades of conflict that a man experiences when he is confronted with the challenge of life vis-a-vis the dharma that he has to follow. As I said, Bhishma has to face another kind of dharmic dilemmas. Should he stay with what he knows to be truth or with his promise? To fulfill your promise is a dharma. So he has promised to bind to the throne. But then there is another aspect of it, and then the truth is with the Pandavas. So should he be this side or that side? So everywhere you will see these dilemmas which are not simple and ethical. They are very complex and they belong to what is known as dharma. Same way with Rama kills Vali. So Vali asks him, you are supposed to be practicing dharma. But why have you killed me like this? And it's a very beautiful, I have several times spoken about it, so I won't repeat that. Rama explains what really is dharma. So dharma is the keynote you will find. The leading motive is the Indian idea of the dharma. And what is dharma? Here the Vedic notion of the struggle between the godheads of truth and light and unity and the powers of darkness and division and falsehood is brought out from the spiritual and religious and internal into the outer intellectual, ethical and vital plane. So here it takes the story of a double form and the ethical ideals of the Indian dharma and others who are embodiments of asuric egoism and self-will and misuse of the dharma. So essentially everything that springs from the ego and selfish interest which is there to create division. And with the children of division are hatred, jealousies, the will to dominate and crush and finish. All these are a dharma. Why? What is the foundation of dharma is unity. But what kind of unity? Not through uniformity, but a manifold unity. So the moment we understand that life is all about all-inclusiveness, but knowing the different shades, knowing the different levels, stages, all these things, then we are on the right track. But whatever leads to division, whatever leads to, as the mother says, disunity, hatred, jealousies, all these are adharmas. Why? Because it is leading to a state of constant friction and division and disharmony. Whereas all that leads to truth, unity, growth of light, harmony, peace, beauty is dharma. So this is how, that's why you'll never find that in all these wars that are described in Indian, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, that when they annexed a kingdom, they destroyed it. They destroyed the sculpture. The only place you find is Hanuman, which is obviously a very symbolic story. You can't burn gold like that. But it's very clearly symbolic. Otherwise, and he is known to have the nature of Kapi. But otherwise, even when Rama annexes the kingdom, he thrones Vibhishna as the king. He doesn't say, okay, I am annexing the kingdom and I am the king. He walks away from there. In Kishkinda, after killing Vali, he thrones Vali as he thrones Sugriva as king. So these stories, when people who have been brought up in these stories, they understand that sometimes you have to fight, but this fight doesn't mean that you are doing it to now loot, plunder, and take and possess what you have gained. No, it has to be also ennobled. It is also yagya. So all this we see here through. And the Ramayana is a work of the same essential kind as the Mahabharata. It differs only by a greater simplicity of plan, a more delicate ideal temperament, and a finer glow of poetic warmth and color. See how he describes. So there is less of the philosophic, more of the purely poetic mind, more of the artist, less of the builder. And you can see that it's like a painting. Ramayana is like a painting. Mahabharata is like a temple built by, it's like an architecture. And the style is also very different. The original Valmiki is, it's like terse, it's powerful, it's like bold strokes. Whereas in Ramayana, it's much more fluid. It's like an artist giving shades and colors to every emotion. So the two complement each other very beautifully. And he describes it. And then in this, so toward the end of Ramayana, he says, the work of Valmiki has been an agent of almost incalculable power in the molding of the cultural mind of India. It has presented to it to be loved and imitated in figures like Rama and Sita, made so divinely and with such a revelation of reality as to become objects of enduring cult and worship. So the ideal of every woman was Sita and Savitri. Whether you can live it or not, but ideal was there. It was not Marilyn Monroe. So you have to, it cannot be any of these modern heroines because it's there in the Indian thought. You may not be able to live it, but you know that is the ideal. So you know you are deviating from the ideal. So something is there in the Indian thought and feeling that this is not right. Same, the ideal is like Rama. And every time you deviate, you know that Ravana is not the way, that you forcibly force yourself on someone and you say that just because I love, I have the right over you to possess you. So all these things were taught in this way. Lakshman, Bharat, Hanuman, the living human image of its ethical ideals, it has fashioned much of what is best and sweetest in the national character. And it has evoked and fixed in it those finer and exquisite yet firm soul tones and that more delicate humanity of temperament which are a more valuable thing than the formal outsides of virtue and conduct. What are the formal outsides of virtue and conduct? When you step from a car, you open the door from this side or that side. And when you greet in certain ways, you see how you propose, you have to get on the knees, pick up a ring and propose. This is a very formal outer conduct. You have to celebrate a Valentine Day. No, that's not required. Very often it only leads to a kind of falsehood. Because you do that and the next day. But when you know that your love should be like Sita or Radha and many of these legendary characters, even Shakuntala, the fiery kind, Draupadi, then these characters are, it doesn't matter on one particular Valentine Day whether you wished happy Valentine Day and went out for a party or not, it's irrelevant. But this is how your ethical mind should be molded. So this was the whole way that they molded the human types within India. So he says, once more I will read it because it is important. Those finer and exquisite yet firm soul tones, compassion, kindness, courage, sacrifice, bravery, these are the soul tones, gratitude. These are tones of the soul which are inward. Your actions should be based on these soul tones. Then outwardly. So outward thing is very simple. Oh, I am so grateful to you. But deep inside, you are basically trying to please the person and you're marketing yourself. That's not how Indian mind operates. When it feels grateful, it can even give its life for that. When it is called to battle, it faces battle with courage and without fear, without flinching from danger. But when it forgives readily. These are the soul tones. In it, those finer and exquisite yet firm soul tones and that more delicate humanity of temperament, which are a more valuable thing than the formal outsides of virtue and conduct. You don't know when Rama met, how did he greet? Did he do namaste or did he shake hands? No, that's not important. But deep inside, Rama is always, you image Rama as gentle, smiling, calm. But when challenged, he is the very soul of courage. That's how Shri Krishna declares. Among those who are courageous, valor, I am Rama. See, that is how. Inwardly it should be. The rest will come automatically. There is a small little passage in that book. Now we are coming toward the end. Sri Aurobindo describes about Indian architecture, temples. For instance, Natraj is a fascinating figure. Natraj weaves calm immobility with rapturous dance. See, it is Shiva. He is associated with calm, immobile spirit, trance-held. But when he dances, and see the pose, if you look at carefully the pose of Natraj, it's a difficult pose. Just try doing even your hand like that. And you know what is this? Why this pose? Just practicing that mudra is not easy. On one leg when you are standing and with the other leg. The reason is that it indicates that there is a rapturous and ecstatic dance, yet there is a just measure. It's not a random, chaotic dance. So even in Tandav, there is a measure of the dance, which you see in the image of Natraj, the cosmic dancer. So it is something fascinating, the way these architectures have been and images. So he says, Indian sacred architecture of whatever date, style or dedication goes back to something timelessly ancient and now outside India almost wholly lost. It used to be there in some of the places. You still see an effort like Angkor Wat temple if you go in nearby Cambodia, and there are places which in ancient times, some places it must have been there, but it has been lost elsewhere. Something which belongs to the past and yet it goes forward too, though this the rationalistic mind will not easily admit. It is still a thing to the future. I felt it when I went to Madurai temple. You may not have kept it so clean as we expected, but the different doors through which you are going. And she is interestingly called Meenakshi. It is about her eyes, which are watching you everywhere and from every side. Each temple, go to the 1,000-pillared temple of Rameshwaram. Aurobindo has used this expression in Savitri, the 1,000-pillared temple of God by the sea. Sea is infinite. 1,000-pillar temples is Sahasrar. Beyond it, there is utter infinity. So you have this, and so many temples built like that. The steps, some of them are on high hilltop mountains, because indicative of the journey that you have to undertake. Amarnath cave, you have to bend over and go. Why? Because you have to be in a state of utter humility. No companions, you go alone. You can't hold hands and go there. Then you find the Amarnath, the Lord of immortality. So every place will have a significance and a symbol. So he says it still belongs to the past, to something which will return upon us and is already beginning to return, something which belongs to the future. So I connect this recent, people often ask, why is Mahakal temple being rebuilt and Ayodhya? It is something very important. Not just to reclaim our past, but it is something to the future. And it's very interesting when you look at the way Mahakal temple has been recently rebuilt. Look at what Shivaji is saying. It is going to come in the future. These things will still come. Now, the real meaning, all the different aspects of Shiva have been brought together. He is the one who is drinking poison, but he is the one when he goes to wed Parvati. That scene is also depicted. You see, there are different aspects which come under one roof. An Indian temple, to whatever godhead it may be built, is in its inmost reality an altar raised to the divine self, a house of the cosmic spirit, an appeal and aspiration to the infinite. As that, now when you see all these Leela of Shiva or Krishna, you see every aspect of life and how every aspect can be tuned into the infinite. That's what is there in the Leelas. In life, when poison comes in your share, it can come from Shiv Leela, you understand. Sometimes everybody is having nice things. But in your share comes poison. What do? You don't run away from it. You drink it as part of the yagya, as prasad. That makes Shiva who he is, the greatest of the great. So this is how you understand it immediately. In that whole story of Devasur, Sagar Manthan, so many interesting things are there. And so Aurobindo describes, and it's endless and very beautiful, must read. And at the end he says that then the decline came, and during the decline we see two significant traditions. One was too significant as like a last outburst of the Indian creative energy. One was the building of the Maratha Empire by Shivaji under the inspiration of Ramdas. But then it failed because it was too much rooted in the local. Even today you see Marathi Manus, so it's rooted in the local. She was the mother India, but mother of, the way the Maratha Empire, conceived her. But very powerful. It is rooted in the Indian tradition, Hindu thought, Sanatan Dharma. But the Peshwas could not hold that. And therefore it declined. And the second was Sikh, which was another branching out from the Indian tradition. But it was one of the early attempts to create a spiritualized society, but in the true sense of the word. So even till today, you will see some of these things like langar, Guru ka langar. So, you go there, they don't ask you anything. You just go have food nicely and come out. There are some very beautiful things. But then it lacked a kind of a life force which can embrace many aspects. So again, it became limited into a certain kind of cult and formula. Again, some of its builders conceived of a Khalsa. Khalsa was a very beautiful word, Khalish, pure, Sikh, the true disciple. But then it could not embrace the many-sided living unity, and therefore this attempt failed. It was premature, but it was the last during the decline. So it still carried the flame to quite an extent. And then Sri Aurobindo says that then the night came, but he gives us beautiful. So, the Sikh Khalsa, on the other hand, was an astonishingly original and novel creation. And its face was turned not to the past, but the future. So it tried to unify even Islam and Vedanta. You see, when you look at it, apart and singular in the theocratic head and democratic soul and structure, its profound spiritual beginning, its first attempt to combine the deepest elements of Islam and Vedanta, it was a premature drive towards an entrance into the third or spiritual stage of human society. But it could not create between the spirit and the external life the transmitting medium of a rich creative thought and culture. That was missing. That you find in ancient India. And thus hampered and deficient, it began and ended within narrow local limits. Achieved intensity, but no power of expansion. The conditions were not then in existence that could have made possible a successful endeavor. Afterwards came the night, and a temporary end of all political initiative and creation. The lifeless attempt of the last generation to imitate and reproduce with a servile fidelity the ideals and forms of the West has been no true indications of the political mind and genius of the Indian people. But again, amid all the mist of confusion, there is still the possibility of a new twilight. I've seen Savitri have two twilights, twilight of the gods, twilight of the earthly real. It's a new twilight, not of an evening, but a morning Yuga Sandhya. And he closes with this powerful sentence I'll read and then we'll stop. The book reads like a wonderful story. Of course, as I said, not everything that Sri Aurobindo has said there, for instance in Ramayana and Mahabharata, not everything is there in this book. But whatever is there is enough to give us a deep, broad and penetrating, high, vast, all-embracing understanding of what really Hindu thought is. So, he closes with this: India of the ages is not dead, nor has she spoken her last creative word. She lives and has still something to do for herself and the human peoples. And that which must seek now to awake is not an anglicized Oriental people, docile pupil of the West, and doomed to repeat the cycle of the Occident's success and failure. But still the ancient, immemorable Shakti, recovering her deepest self, lifting her head higher toward the supreme source of light and strength, and turning to discover the complete meaning and a vaster form of her Dharma. Namaste.